All right, for another edition of Speaking of Data, we welcome back Fern Halper. We're going to talk about the state of data management today. But first, before we get into this, thank you, Fern, for joining us. How are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing well, doing well. It's a nice Friday, long weekend. I'm excited. We have a nice little holiday coming up on Monday. So let's get into it before I bid you adieu and let you enjoy your time off. So the state of data management is the topic of the day today. So why is data management so important? I feel like that's a good place for us to begin this conversation.
Yeah. So I'll start off by just defining what we mean by data management at TDWI. And that's basically that it's the process of collecting and storing and organizing and maintaining and using data effectively. And it includes several disciplines that I'm sure people are familiar with, things like data integration and data quality, master data management, data architecture, metadata management, those sorts of subdisciplines, are basically part of data management, and really what you're trying to get out of it. Why is it so important? It's so important because you want to make sure that data is accurate and consistent and accessible and secure, and that it can be used to support your organization's needs. And when we survey organizations, we often hear that their biggest need is around a solid data infrastructure to support analytics. And not only analytics now, but also applications and, the ability to monetize data. And in order to do that, they need a solid data foundation, which is why data management is so important.
So then, obviously, we're going to talk about the state of data management. So what is the current state that data management is in? What are you seeing from your research?
Yeah, so what we did was we actually created this assessment. It's called the Data Management Maturity Model, and it's one of a number of assessments that we actually have at TDWI. And in it, we measure 5 categories of data management, things that we think are important for data management maturity. And that includes things like organizational commitment, that you have the resources, so, the funding, et cetera, that you have a solid architecture in place for data management, that you have a good data life cycle, that you can manage data throughout its life cycle, and of course that you govern data. So as I said, we created this model. It's on our website. If you want to take it, you could simply go to Research and Resources tab. That's a tab on the website. And then you'll see 2 assessments, the analytics maturity model and the data management maturity model. So you can go to that, you can take the assessment, which is basically an online survey. It probably has like 50 or 60 questions. And then when you're done taking the assessment, you get a score. And that score is out of 100, and it puts you into a specific maturity level. And this thing will give you your overall score, and it will also give you the score for each of those 5 dimensions: the organizational commitment, the resources, the architecture, data lifecycle, and data governance. So, that's where this data is coming from primarily, although we pulled from other sources also. But what we saw from that data was that the overall average score for 22 and 23, 2022 and 2023, was about a 55 out of 100. So, that was sort of, right basically in the middle. There were some people who scored higher, some people who scored lower, but that actually put the respondents at what we were calling stage 3. We called it the early established phase of maturity. And, there are 5, just like there were 5 dimensions in this model, there are 5 stages of maturity, that basically go from nascent to mature, and so this one was smack in the middle, at number 3. And, basically that looks like, you're in the middle, that executive leadership is beginning to recognize the importance of data management, and they're starting to establish a data strategy. And they're emphasizing the need for things like data literacy, the understanding of data, for example. We're starting to see in that stage collaboration across functional silos. Organizations, different parts of the organization are starting to share and reuse data assets. They're obviously starting to allocate funds to prioritize data management and invest in the talent and, you know, the technology and the education and that sort of thing. You know, they're also looking for an architecture that, you know, isn't necessarily a traditional data warehouse. That's no longer central to the architecture. So in stage 3, we see that organizations are making use of platforms like the cloud. You know, that's going to play a really important role, and data integration is becoming critical. There's more focus on pipelines, you know, to get data from source to target and to support the growing volume and velocity of data. We see more reliance on shareable data, you know, and the need for metadata and data curation, which is probably why, you know, data catalogs are becoming so important to organizations. And organizations are starting to establish data governance teams, you know, but interestingly, that's so all sort of in the middle of the road, you know, but they're looking at data governance teams to operate on new platforms like the cloud and, you know, having analytics integrated into the plan. You know, so those are some of the characteristics at stage 3. And of course, you know, maturity is a moving target. So, you know, but that's what we see as the state of maturity right now.
Yeah, 55 out of 100, it sounds so low. I mean, just to the ear, right? When you're used to scores in school, 55 out of 100 is a terrible score, but it sounds like that's actually not, you know, a failing grade in this particular scale, right?
Yeah, good point. It's sort of, you know, it's sort of like you're getting past the middle, you know, and you're making progress, even though it's not a 75 or an 80, you know. So, and you know, of course, there are organizations that scored 75 or 80, you know, percent on it, who, you know, they're used to dealing with the complexity of the growing volumes and variety and, you know, whatnot of data. And so, you know, they may have already have a solid cloud hybrid infrastructure in place, and, you know, they have better data governance that's not just around looking at compliance and security, which is often what we see, you know, with a lot of people taking this. And they have, you know, executive commitment, and that commitment also has funding. Maybe they've already appointed like a CDO or someone like that, right, who actually has a budget, you know, and where the CIO has, you know, a good budget, but, you know, there's a budget from somewhere to do this work. So,
yeah. Well, I think you actually kind of touched on a couple topics there that I would potentially name as challenges. And it leads me to my next kind of question here. So what would be challenges that you're seeing that organizations are facing with data management?
yeah, so, you know, obviously there's going to be organizational and technology challenges. You know, on the organizational side, you know, just as I was mentioning, you know, that respondents say that leaders understand the value of data, you know, this whole executive thing. So they say that leaders understand the value of data, but I think that there's a gap between understanding that it's valuable and saying that it's, you know, great, to actually putting support behind the data management efforts. You know, so in this data management assessment, 73% of the respondents agreed that executives value data, you know, and about the same amount said that their organization values data. So obviously, you know, a high percentage are saying that they value data, but about 20% had a strong data strategy in place. So if you value it, you should put a strategy in place for data management, you know, but only about 20% said they had a strong data strategy in place. And the strategy also isn't really communicated. So people don't necessarily know what the strategy is. You know, only 12% said that their strategy was you know, communicated, and only about 40% said that a data culture was defined. You know, so I think that there was a ways to go sort of in the leadership and strategy components of data management, which obviously, as we said, translates into funding. And we're also seeing organizations struggle with data literacy, so these are some of the challenges why they're not higher than the 55. And on the data side, that often means understanding of the data. On the analytics front, that may mean more about critical thinking or communicating with data and being able to interpret analytics results. But when you ask IT, what does data literacy mean? They say it's understanding the data, and getting metadata around that data, which is why they're often trying to put this data catalog in place, which is a good thing, as I mentioned, because that can help with understanding what type of data you have and helping to govern the data. But another challenge is even if you have a catalog, it's often difficult to get people to buy into the catalog approach because it's just sort of people need to be engaged with the catalog, use the catalog, be committed to, updating the catalog. If you want to say, I'm using this data set and I'm giving it a score of 4 out of 5, like keeping it up to date and doing that sort of thing. So what we see is that these data catalogs aren't necessarily well maintained. If you had a score of 1 to 5 on a question about maintaining a data catalog, the median score in the maturity model was a 2. So that's less than the 3, you would think, like at least they should score 3. And, also they need to get their metadata together, right? The data about the data that's in the catalog or wherever it is. And, that's also a challenge. That actually got a median score of 1, so that was the lowest score.
Wow.
So, those are some of the organizational challenges. And then, there's also some challenges on the technology side. We see organizations moving to cloud data warehouses and data lakes, and they're trying to unify their data for analytics, using those platforms, but they're still dealing with hybrid environments, which is fine to have a hybrid environment, but organizations are struggling with that. And, they're trying to maybe use a cloud data stack approach or a fabric approach, but, they're running into some issues there, just getting it sort of all working. There's also a challenge with data pipelines, and that may include things around, ingesting the data or validating it. And a top concern that we see for organizations, they're struggling with building one-off pipelines because a lot of times they're building these manual pipelines. And close to 50% in this assessment of the respondents, they were still building manual pipelines, and those aren't scalable, so that's another problem. And then, finally, organizations are saying that they want to democratize their data and make it available to everyone to use, and it's a top priority. But most of the people who were responding to this maturity model said that they only have self-service for some users or some parts of the organization. I mean, and maybe not everyone needs to use self-service. I get that, but there's a little bit of a struggle there. And, I will acknowledge, I think, with this maturity model, that maybe people who are taking it are drawn to it because they know that they have a ways to go. But the reality is that, we're seeing this type of results also mirrored in our surveys as well. So I think that it's pretty close to what's actually happening, and that there are these challenges out there.
That's very interesting. And those challenges obviously will probably persist, as we move, more and more people having to access this data more and more, I think, on a daily basis that aren't used to doing that. I did a podcast with David Langer on data literacy, and we kind of brought up the idea of AI and large language models being able to help, at least provide a baseline for data literacy, or at least some sort of bridge to get people to become more literate quicker, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Do you see that being a possibility as, that develops for folks? Like if you're in an organization and you want to be starting to work with data a little bit more, a little bit quicker and on your own, instead of having to take, I don't know, some like a long amount of time to learn the terminology and find out where everything is, would it be easier potentially to have some sort of chatbot system within your organization to help you get where you need to go?
I mean, it's possible, you know, that you could just ask the thing questions and it would explain to you, you know, what's metadata, what, you know, I mean, I would imagine that the company, if they're going to go that route, they'd want to train, excuse me, the chat bot, you know, to be able to be specific to their organization, you know, like, you know, where can I get data, or
Right.
you know, what does the data mean? Well, in our data warehouse, you know, here's the kind of data that we have in our data warehouse or in our data lake or our data lake house. You know, here's what it means, you know, and put some of that functionality in it. Yeah, that could be helpful for sure.
Interesting. So then we heard about the challenges of data management. What do you think organizations should be doing to try to modernize their data management, stay up with the times?
Yeah, well, yeah, unfortunately, the times keep changing. The times they are changing, right? But I mean, I think the first thing is that you have to build a data strategy around what's needed. You know, there's got to be a business reason, you know, that you're changing up your data management. And if there's a business reason, for example, to move to the cloud to support modern analytics like machine learning, then that's going to take you down one path. You know, maybe your business need is to reduce the cost of the data centers. You know, that may take you down another path for your strategy. So I think it's important to have a business reason for modernization. I mean, and second, you know, so you start with that strategy, but you also need to have supportive leadership, like I was talking about. That was a challenge. That can be very helpful. So, you know, that includes, you know, someone like the chief data officer, whose job it is to derive value from data, and they set the strategy. You know, they try to set the data strategy to provide value, and they may also lead or at least coordinate the data governance programs and data literacy programs, and they may be responsible for architecture and tools. You know, so this is sort of a growing role. We saw about 20 to 25% of respondents in recent surveys have some sort of chief data officer or chief analytics officer. You know, another 25% have some sort of VP or director of IT filling that role. You know, but we see is that those organizations, and I think I mentioned this on another podcast, you know, when they have CDOs, they tend to be more satisfied, you know, with their efforts, and especially if that CDO is part of the C-suite. You know, so we see some organizations starting to build these data offices, you know, that are headed up by the CDO, and they are responsible for carrying out the data vision, you know, and putting all these programs in place. So I think that, you know, to the extent if you have someone, you know, who's saying, I really think data is valuable, you know, then hopefully they're thinking about, you know, the CDO type of role to put in place. I mean, also organizations are starting to implement like a structured process, you know, for data operations, you know, data ops, because I think that that's really important, you know, so that you know, it looks at it has a wide range of components, you know, in the data ops process, like too many to even, you know, list. But these, you know, getting data engineers in place to deal with the operations of data, you know, can also help once you have a strategy, you know, so you know why you're putting those people in place. And, you know, I think that it's, you know, recently people have been looking at as part of their strategy, they've been looking at trying to unify their platforms to provide a more trusted data source. You know, and then I mentioned that there's a couple of architectural approaches, the cloud stack, the data fabric approach, you know, so look at some of those approaches, you know, and this is what people are doing. Like in the cloud stack, they're looking at the integrated set of services, you know, that are tightly integrated, that are provisioned together, and that the cloud provider might offer with its partners. So the idea is that you're centralizing or unifying your data in the stack. And then in the data fabric approach, you know, that's a way to bring data together to map and connect relevant application data stores with metadata. So it may be that it's still in a silo, but there's this layer of abstraction over these silos that, you know, can sometimes be called a semantic layer or a virtual, you know, layer that can help you sort of tie all of that data together. So, I think that you should think about those types of approaches and what makes sense for your organization. Other tools, obviously, we talked about data catalogs, those are important. I think if you have the budget, to be able to start looking at other tools that can help for the integration as well as after the integration, tools that are automated and augmented, that can be used, that can help also. So, but I think that the strategy tied to the business and then sort of getting someone in place to own that strategy, I think that that's really important to get started with.
Okay, so I know that we want to call out the research that you've done here. You authored a report. Can you let folks know where to go to find that, please?
Yeah, so it's called the State of Data Management. And if you go onto the TDWI website and you go under Research and Resources, you'll see a tab that's called State of Reports. And just go there and download the report. It's a good report. It has a lot of not just this assessment stuff in it, but it has other tidbits of information in there as well from other research that we've done.
Fantastic. Well, it's always a pleasure talking with you, Fern, and I think this is going to be a valuable podcast for those that are interested in where data management is in relation to where they seem to be in their daily lives and what they're doing with their work and their organizations. So thanks for shedding some more light on the topic. And I hope you have a good rest of your day and a good weekend. And I'm sure we'll be seeing each other on this podcast again pretty shortly.
Yeah, you too, Andrew. Nice talking to you.
Thanks, Fern.